In this video, we will be talking about how to subset in R. Now, subsetting is when you have, like, for example, a data set, and you want to grab a smaller portion of it. You know, like, for instance, if you had a data set with 100 rows and you want to grab the first 27, that's subsetting. Now, all these grayed out things here are just comments, but I'm going to be filling in code throughout it as we go. There will be a link in the description to this .r file with all the code in it if you want to follow along there or use it as reference for later. At that same link, you'll also be able to download demographics.csv, which is the dataset that I'm going to be using for this. So if you want to follow along, the link to everything you need is in the description. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go to import dataset and actually get the data into R. So it's a CSV file, so we do import dataset from text base, and this will bring up your file explorer. So next, you just go to wherever your dataset is saved. Most people's it's in their downloads folder. I have this folder right here where demographics.csv. I'm fine with the name demographics. We see that heading is on yes, which is what we want. You can see the column names here are bold. If they weren't, if they come in like this, make sure heading is on yes. So we click import, and now we have this data set in R. So this is a data set with 890 rows, just about different people. You have this column here that's just some general like identification number. You have income, age, sex, and if they're married or not. So the way subsetting works in R, what we do is we first type in the name of our data set, so in this case demographics, and then we use, and this is important, we use square brackets. Square brackets are the main thing we'll use for subsetting in pretty much any case. Now the way the square brackets work is you first put in the row number or numbers that you want, and then you put in the column number that you want. So for instance, if I wanted to grab whatever's in the first row in the third column, I would first put in 1, because we're looking at first row, and I would do a comma, and then a 3. So we're looking for what's in our demographics data set at row 1 in column 3. And if we go over here, we can see column 3 is our age column, and row 1's right here. So we can see what it should give back is 55. So if we go back and run this, you can see it gave back 55. So that's how you can grab a singular value from any data set. But what if we don't want to grab, one specific value? What if we want an entire row? For instance, what if we want to grab only the third row in the demographics data set? Well, what we would do is, once again, we type demographics, and we'll do our square brackets, and then the first number is always the row number, so we're going to put a 3, and then we're going to put a comma, and then nothing else. So basically, you could put a space. Either way works. If you put a space or just a blank here, both will work. So if you don't specify a column number or numbers, it automatically just assumes you want all of them. So if I run this, this should just print off the third row in our demographics data set. And you can see it printed off the third row in our data set, and we can make sure of that just by going back here, and you'll see it's the same information. So I'm going to repeat this again because it is important. You do still have to have the comma here. You just leave this blank, because when you leave it blank, R's like, okay, you're grabbing every column. So now what do we do if we want to grab only a column? Well, it's very similar. We'll go demographics again, square brackets, and then we can put a comma, so leave the row space blank. And then let's say we want the third column, we can put in a 3 here. And if we run this, and again you can put a space here or not, just as long as there isn't a number, you'll see it prints off, well, the entire third column. So this is all the age values. And yeah, there's 890 of them, so this looks kind of disgusting, but that is grabbing the entire third column. However, this is not the best way of grabbing a column, and what we'll learn is that you can grab a column by doing the name of your data set, $, and then you'll see after you put in a $, R brings up a drop-down list of all the variables. So like if we wanted to grab age, we could do demographics, $age, and you'll see this does end up printing just the exact same numbers. This is the much better way of grabbing a column, because especially we only have 5 variables. So like we can be like, okay, yeah, age is the third one, that's easy. But what if you have, 30 plus variables and you want to grab one in the middle? You're going to have to go over here and count one by one just to make sure you're getting to the right one. Whereas with the $, you can just immediately type in the name and get the same thing. So while you can subset like this and grab a column, it's much more preferable to do it like this. So how do we grab multiple rows and columns? Because up here, all we were doing was grabbing, one specific value, or one row, one column. Well, you might think we could do something like this. Let's say we wanted to grab rows 1, 2, and 5 with all the columns. Well, you might be like, okay, let's do 1, 2, 5, and, well, we'll leave an extra, we want all the columns. You'll see if we run this, it just gives back an error. If we want multiple things, we can't just put them in here with commas. What R wants is it wants one object in front of the comma and one object after it when you have rows and columns. So how can we do that? Well, if we can use the C function, which stands for concatenate, which is not very helpful, but what C does is it makes a vector. It makes a list of numbers that can be read as one thing. So for instance, if I did C 1, 5, 13, 47, well, what this is it's just now these 4 numbers. This one thing right here, see, R's reading it as one thing. It's 1, 5, 13, and 47. If we wanted to grab all the columns in rows 1, 5, 13, and 47, what we could do is type demographics, square brackets, and then we'll put in our C, 1, 5, 13, 47. And then we do need to put the comma to say we're grabbing all the columns. And now if we run this, you'll see we grabbed rows 1, 5, 13, and 47. So if you want to grab multiple things, you should do it inside the C in almost all cases. Now there is a shortcut, which I'm going to get into down here, but for the most part, if you want to grab multiple things, you can put it inside a C. Just remember the comma at the end because we're still wanting to grab all the columns. Now if we wanted just one column, like for instance if we just wanted the age of each of these people, we could put a 3 here. And you see if I run that, it gives 55, 45, 54, 55, which lines up with the age column here. So there is a shortcut here. If you're wanting to find multiple numbers in a row, as in like the first 5 rows, first 10 rows, or maybe all rows from 21 to 53, as long as all the numbers are in a row, there's a shortcut you can use. So for instance, if we wanted to do the first 5 rows, what we would do is 1, 5. And you see if I run this, it prints off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the way we can read the colon here is just read the colon as 2. So you can see this and read it as 1, 2, 5. So we could do it for other numbers too. Like for instance, we could do 23 to 41. And you'll see it prints off all the numbers from 23 to 41. And this is also automatically as a vector here. And so what we can do is put it directly into our square brackets. So let's say we wanted to grab rows 13 to 20 and columns 4 to 5. So 4 and 5. We would do demographics, and then we're grabbing rows 13 to 20, and then we do a comma, and now our columns 4 to 5. And if I run this, you'll see it prints off rows 13 to 20 and only the sex and married column. Now the reason we don't need to do the C parentheses when we do it like this is because you see when I ran them, it's already printing off as a vector. You see they're all under one object together. Now if you want, you can break this whole thing into parts, which I know some people find a lot more helpful. So in R, you can choose basically any name you want and assign, well, basically anything you want to it. In this case, we're going to be looking at numbers. So for instance, let's say we wanted to grab the rows 21, 100, and 819. Well, if we wanted to get this into square brackets, we'd have to do something like this line 21 up here. We put the C inside, and it starts to look a bit cluttered and confusing. Well, what we can do is we can put these values into any name we want. So for instance, I'm going to call this row nums. I'm going to put row nums is equal to these 3 numbers. And if I run this, row nums just popped up, a value row nums, and you can see it's equal to 3 numbers, 21, 100, and 819. So you can put basically any name you want here. Now every time R sees the word row nums, it sees it exactly the same as these 3 numbers. Like for instance, if I just go down here and type row nums and hit enter, you'll see it prints off 21, 100, 819. So instead of putting the whole C thing into the brackets, what we could do now is do demographics, square brackets, row nums, and then if we want to grab all the columns, we'll just do a comma and leave it blank. And if we run this, you'll see it prints off rows, all of rows 21, 100, and 819. And you'll see this is the exact same thing as if I put square brackets here, and if I let's just copy and paste this in. If I run this, you'll see it's the exact same information. R reads these two things as exactly the same now. Okay, so now we know how to grab specific rows or columns that we want. However, what if we want to exclude certain rows or columns? Like, instead of grabbing just row 4, how would we grab every single row except for row 4? Well, it's very similar to what we did before. If we type demographics and then our square brackets, and then let's say we want to get rid of row 1 and column 5. Why not? We'll do 2 at once. The way we get rid of a row is we just put a negative sign in front of the number. So now if we ran this right here, this would print off the entire demographics dataset just without the first row. So let's say we want to get rid of the first row and the 5th column, the married column. Let's say we wanted to get rid of that. We would do -1 and then comma -5. And if I run this, it's going to spit out a lot down here. So it printed the first 251 rows because that's the max it can print. So there's a lot more than this. But you can see if we scroll up that row 1 is missing. Also, the married column is missing. So to get rid of specific things, you just put a negative sign in front of it. So now if you wanted to get rid of multiple rows and columns, it's basically the exact same process. You just put a minus sign in front of whatever you're selecting. So like, for instance, if we go back to the row nums up here, let's say you want to grab every row except 21, 100, and 819. Well, I could just put a minus sign in front of row nums, and we put the comma. And if I run that, well, we'll scroll up. We got rid of 21 and 100. So if we look, yep, 100, row 100 is missing, and 21 should be missing as well. And yep, it's gone. And if you aren't using the names, again, it's exactly the same. I'm just going to copy and paste this to save time. But you put a minus in front of the whole C thing, and you'll see that'll print off the exact same thing. And if we go up and make sure, yep, 100 is gone, and 21 is gone as well. So that covers subsetting for things like data sets where there's rows and columns. What happens when we have something that's just a list of numbers? It doesn't have columns. For instance, if I clear the console here, let's look at row nums. You see row nums is just 3 numbers. It's a list of numbers. It doesn't have rows and columns. It's just one list of numbers. Well, subsetting for this looks very, very similar. So for instance, if we wanted to grab the second number of row nums, so let's say we wanted to just grab the 100, we would type in row nums, square brackets, and then 2 for the second number. And if we run that, you'll see it printed a lot of the comments, but it also printed the 100. Now you might be asking, why did we not put the comma? Well, the comma is there for what's called 2-dimensional objects, which are things with rows and columns, like this data set here. Row nums is 1-dimensional. It's just a list of numbers. So when you don't have rows and columns, when it's basically just one long row, you don't need to put the comma because there are no columns to select. And one last quick thing to mention, because I know this shows up on a project later in this class, you can overwrite any of these numbers. For instance, if you wanted to change the age in the first column here. Well, in order to change it, first we have to select it. So put demographics, and if you want to grab age in the first row, well, that's first row, third column. So I'm putting in 1, 3, and you'll see if I run that, it gives back 55. So we are grabbing the right number here. So let's say we wanted to change this number to, let's say we accidentally typed it in wrong and the age is actually 65. If we just put an equal sign afterwards, we can change any value in a data set to be whatever we want it to be. So if I say this is now 65, and if I run this, if we go back here, you'll see age is now 65. So if you want to change any value in here, you can do so by first selecting it with the square brackets and then setting it equal to whatever you want. And this is just something that comes up on your first project, so I wanted to throw it in here real quick. So yeah, this is how you subset data in R. Hopefully it made some sense. If you have any questions about it, please leave them in the comments. If you have questions about other topics that I have not made videos on, leave those in the comments too. Again, the link to this whole R file here and the demographics dataset will be in the description if you want to download it just for your own reference. I tried to make lots of comments so that, if you go back and look at this on your own, hopefully, things make sense.